Hello, hello, ladies. Today we are talking about failure. And for those of you who don't know me yet or who are new to the group, I am Jamila McMallow, life and relationship strategist for powerful, driven women coaches, and entrepreneurs. I am also the creator of the Prosperous Wife Mastermind, and I am a phenomenal one on one coach for the woman who prefers to move to her next level in private. So, failure, an interesting topic, right? Because if you're driven, if you're powerful, if you're successful, if you're doing all these things, then failure is something that, is kind of the opposite of all those ways of being, right? So, what this is not going to be is me sitting up here talking about, trying to give you some pep talk about how you can turn failure into some type of a teaching lesson. And it's not really failures and failure. It's just, learning what is not to do the next time and whatnot. And all of that is absolutely 1000% true. And I agree with it in everything. But what I really want to talk to you about is the emotional side of failure. And this is where we, being driven and powerful, can sometimes struggle to give ourselves permission to just kind of to feel it. Okay. It's something that many of us live in fear of, something that many of us a lot of times can actually even get stuck in indecision because we're trying so hard to avoid it. But it's something that obviously is a normal part of our experience because we're all imperfect. We make mistakes. We're not going to get everything right. Okay. We don't have all the answers. Even when we've sought out counsel from so-called experts, even they don't have all the answers. So we're not always going to get it right. And sometimes we're going to try things that are not going to turn out the way that we want. Sometimes we're going to do things and not be the person that we really thought we would be in that moment. A really great example of this is if any of you are mothers, you know what failure feels like because you may feel it, especially when your kids are little like mine. You feel it sometimes almost on a daily basis because you lose your temper or you just get frustrated or you're just like, and it's just a constant reminder because you have an idea of who you want to up. And then when things don't go that way, then what do you spend the rest of the day doing? Or after you put them to bed, what do you spend the rest of the time doing? Is just beating yourself up about how you're failing, about how you're not a good mother, about how your kids are going to be crazy, whatever, right? Because you are, creating people. So being a mother is a pretty serious job, right? I just use that as one example. But the thing about failure is when it happens to us, because because here's how you have to look at yourself. When you're driven, imagine yourself, you're on the freeway going like 100 miles an hour. That's how we roll. We don't do anything slow. We don't do anything. We just go. We go after it. We decide what we want and we make decisions while we're in motion, right? We're constantly in a state of taking action. We're constantly in a state of trying to acquire knowledge and information so we know what's going to be the next move we make, but we are moving, right? We're in constant motion. And so failure essentially is that 100-mile-per-hour car going down the road slamming into a brick wall. Now you can imagine the damage that that's going to cause, right? If a car is going 100 miles per hour and it slams into a brick wall, that car is going to turn into a crinkled little mess, and the driver is not going to survive that, right? So it's a catastrophe. And there are moments that we have all experienced in our lives that were a catastrophe. For some of those things actually shut the whole thing down, right? Our lives came to a screeching halt as we knew them to be, and we had to pick up and start over. I have a couple of examples of my own that I'll share. The first one is I started a business back in 2006, and I had to close it in 2010 because that was, when the recession hit. And to be honest, I had really no clue what it took, to run a business. The reason why I started the business is because I had purchased the product from someone else, had such a poor experience. I said, I can do this better than her and give the customer the type of experience that I want. And so that's what I did. And I basically just lost money for 4 years and then eventually had to close it because it was a luxury type item at the time. And, we were in a recession and nobody was paying hundreds of dollars for what it was that I was selling. And so in my mind, that was kind of my first biggest failure. Okay. I guess another incident that just popped into my mind is once when I was even younger, we did, me and my sisters, we did rhythmic gymnastics. At this time, it was just me and my younger sister. And she was a lot better than I am because she has an athletic build. Her body was really built for that. Mine is not. That's not my thing. Um, Everybody has their thing, right? There are certain sports that, if you have a certain body type or whatever, you like are, it's like it's made for you. Do you know what I'm saying? And then we can get into situations to where it's not us. It's just we're trying to make ourselves fit into something that we're not built for. And then we feel like a failure when it's like, no, my parents should have done a better job at really listening to what I was interested in, what I was good at, and then put me into something that really spoke to my true talents. You see what I'm saying? So that's kind of the first thing that comes to my mind. But because I was in rhythm gymnastics and I remember I did this routine and I forgot it or whatever, but I did such a horrible job and I got a low score. And I've never in my life just burst out in tears and cried in my mother's lap. And I remember doing that. I had to be like 11 or something like that. So I'd say that was probably my first failure. But my biggest failure as an adult or I won't say my biggest, but the first one I can think of as an adult was when I started this business and then I had to close it. And it felt like no matter what I did, no matter what I tried, no matter what, it just wouldn't work. It wouldn't work. And I didn't know at that time. I wasn't tapped into all the entrepreneurial resources like I am now. That's one thing I can say I love about the coaching space is once you step over into the world of personal development, it's like there is nothing that you can't kind of like figure out, overcome, whatever, get help for. There's a coach for everything. There's a book for everything. And understanding limiting beliefs and all those things. I didn't have that. I just didn't know anything about that. And so I felt like a failure. I really did. And that experience, really stayed with me. I can't remember exactly now because, I've been in business now for some years. But as you know, entrepreneurship is like an onion and we're constantly peeling back layers. But I'm pretty sure that was one of the layers I had to peel back pretty early on to get over, or you won't take action because you're too afraid of failing again. So that was one. And then I remember when I actually went through my divorce. Okay. I had been married for 14 years. Thankfully, we didn't have any children. And my life, hit that brick wall. My life as I knew it was over. I had to start over at 35, 34, and, just everything. Everything as I know from the time I was 20, because that's when I married my ex, to 34, my whole 20s. There were so many things that I hadn't done on my own yet because I'd always had someone with me. Right. And so that was a huge shift and change. However, that experience was different because I allowed myself to grieve the loss. I allowed myself to grieve the loss of the marriage. I allowed myself to grieve the loss of the life that I had been living up to that point. I allowed myself to grieve the loss of who I thought was, and at that time, my best friend. And I allowed myself to just feel those feelings. And because grief is like a bucket, you just let it out and then eventually it empties down to the bottom. It doesn't just keep filling back up. And I allowed myself to thoroughly grieve that loss. And it did feel like a failure when your marriage ends for whatever reason. And I can't speak to ones who maybe have made that decision for themselves. I know in my case, it was my ex that was the causation in that. And so but it comes to an end nonetheless. And you think about what you're going to tell your friends, you think about what you're going to tell your parents, and you feel like you have failed hugely. You're embarrassed to say it. You're like, oh, I'm not married anymore because you don't want to use the term divorced, right? Little things like that. But I allowed myself to grieve. And then I turned around and I said, now, what do I have to do to make sure that this never happens again? Who do I have to become? What is it that I need to learn so that I never, ever, ever choose a man like this again? And never, ever, ever find myself in a situation like this again. That is what I had to do. And that is what I chose to do. And that is what I did. Because now the space was available. I had grieved that loss. So my emotional state moved on. Now I was open and ready and primed to receive something new and different. And that new and different was, what is it now that I'm going to do moving forward so I don't repeat that? What can I learn from it? What did I get from it? What truths, what hard truths do I need to admit about myself? Because, I wasn't, listen, I wasn't engaged in any deal breaking behavior, and I'm not the causation. However, I wasn't a perfect wife, right? So I have to be able to admit that to myself. Okay. Even in my former business, the one that failed, yeah, I can say I tried everything, but I didn't even know what I was doing. And I wasn't necessarily seeking the help. Hello, I was trying to figure it all out on my own. So that was a lesson. So fast forward back to this situation, because the reason why I'm using this point is because this particular experience with failure launched me to where I am today. And my life would not be where it is today had that failure not occurred. Do you understand what I'm saying? Had that failure not occurred, I would not have been launched, catapulted to where I am now. So your relationship with failure, you cannot avoid it, okay? You cannot avoid it. It's going to happen. But what you don't want to do is, when you do fail, just admit it to yourself. And I'm not talking about failure, perceived failure, where you're just beating yourself up over not meeting your own unrealistic expectations. And we'll talk about that another time. And, that's a whole different thing, because all of my clients, when you're a high performer, when you're driven, you have high expectations for yourself, of which you almost set yourself up to fall short of. So then you therefore can slip into the long route of negative thinking and the loops of what ifs and all that stuff. And then when it's time to make your next move, you get stuck in indecision because you don't want a repeat of that, or you don't want to fail. So it's just this loop, right? So I'm not talking about any of that. I'm talking about real failure, significant failure. You made a bad choice, or you made a choice and it just didn't turn out the way that you would have liked for it to. There are things sometimes that happen that are out of our control. Circumstances can change. Yes, we can have absolute conviction and belief within ourselves, but we don't have control of all the variables, right? Only ourselves. And so when I took this situation, my divorce, and allowed myself to grieve, and then took the lessons from it, and then made the conscious choices, decisions, and effort to become the person I needed to become in order at that time to learn how to function in a normal, healthy relationship, then I was absolutely blessed with my husband. It was 18 months later, after my divorce was final, that I ended up marrying my husband, my current husband, the love of my life. My ex-husband didn't want children, so I never thought I would have children. I had my first kid at 37, 39, and then 41. Our first son is deceased, but again, that's another story for another day. However, here I am, married to this wonderful man now. It's almost 8 years, and I have 2 beautiful children that I'm raising. What? And all of that was from a failure. Now, could I have wallowed in that failure? Could I have sunken into bitterness and anger and just got stuck there and then just stayed there and I don't need no man and all this? Okay. Yeah, that can happen, right? I could have got all bitter after my business, like, I don't, I'm just, entrepreneurship don't work, none of this work and all this. No, we're not going to do that. Okay. No. So when you experience failure, you can get stuck at certain points in the process, but the major one that I find when it comes to powerful, driven women is avoidance. That's the one that we really tend to struggle with, is once we experience a failure or even a perceived failure, then we try to do everything in our power to avoid having that experience again, which of course makes sense, right? We want to stay safe and whatnot. However, it's a lot of times it's this it's just a fear of the unknown, and we can get stuck in inaction because we're scared we're going to make a mistake, rather than really breaking down what happened and making the conscious decision to learn from it, to change and become better. Because listen, if you become a different person, then you don't make the same choices and decisions. So that failure happening again can't happen, because you're no longer that person. You no longer think that way. You no longer make choices and decisions from that point. You're in a new place. You've worked through some things. You've healed some things. You see things differently. And so your whole world is different. And so, no, that failure is not going to happen again because you've moved on past it. And so that's my message for you ladies today, is when it comes to failure, you have to allow yourself to feel the emotions of it. You got to let yourself grieve whatever it is that you feel like you lost. You have to let yourself feel it, because trying to force yourself into some type of a pep talk or a great way of spinning it around in the initial stages of it doesn't work. It's not going to work. Okay. You got to let yourself grieve it, feel sorry, let those feelings, because here's the thing about feelings. Unless you're feeding negative feelings, right? And this is not a negative feeling. A negative feeling is like, I'm not good enough, I'm unworthy, right? Those are negative feelings. Those are stories that you're telling yourself that are not true. But if you experience something catastrophic, a failure that's in your mind you view it as a failure, that's not a negative emotion that you would respond with sadness to that you would respond with disappointment to that. Those are just feelings. And you have to give yourself permission to feel them so that then they can be released and processed and go. When we don't allow ourselves to feel our feelings is when we suffer. When we stuff our feelings down and try to speak louder over them is when we suffer. And here's the kicker. It doesn't work. You're just going to end up, it's going to come out. It's going to come out. Okay. And you don't want to lose it at the wrong moment or fail to take advantage of an opportunity or make a decision from a place of that avoidance that's based upon a failure that was never acknowledged, emotions that were never dealt with, if that makes sense to you. So like I said, that was my message for you today. I am very curious to hear your thoughts on failure and also what you thought about this discussion today. So by all means, please drop your comments below. And what I'm also going to do is I'm going to put my booking link in the first comment below this post about this about this discussion. And if anything I spoke about today moved you and you feel like you'd like to have a one-on-one discussion to learn more about what I do, perhaps how I can help you on your journey, then by all means, click that link and book a call. And also feel free to visit my website at coachjamila.com to learn really more about me and the programs that I offer. But again, I'm going to put that booking link in the first comment below this. Book that call ASAP because my calendar fills up pretty quick because I have very limited limited availability because, like I told you, my primary job is my children. So anyway, thank you so much for listening in, and I will look forward to sharing more with you ladies next time.